Now, I think these are all certain suggestions, in fact, to have the obligations arising out of the contract of employment to the minimum extent possible. See, why I'm saying is, yes, we are using the concept CTC. Liking it or not, I think this has come into stay, and many of the industries, they use the term CTC, right? But CTC is not defined anywhere. So there is no common definition. So the CTC in one company, definitely the definition will vary when we compare it with the other company. So there is no clear, I think there is no definition through any of the legislations, right? So it is companies making, and each company defines CTC in their own fashion, right, to suit to their requirement, right? But somehow it is there in practice almost for the last 20-25 years, it is there, right? So because the companies are using the CTC, companies want to mention almost all the amounts which they would incur in the appointment order, in the contract of employment, right? Earlier it was not the situation. There were companies were just mentioning the monthly income of the individual employee. So monthly income of the individual employee, that was mentioned as consideration in the contract of employment. So that position got changed, particularly after the advent of many of the multinational companies, right? So now, instead of the monthly income, the expenditure of the management in respect of a particular employee, that is now getting mentioned as consideration in the contract of employment. That is the crucial difference, right? But nothing wrong, that can be done. But my suggestion here would be, if we continue to do this, mention this CTC as consideration in the contract of employment, one thing which we may have to ensure is the monthly gross income of the individual, that should be ascertainable. In some of the cases, unfortunately, when I go through their appointment orders, I think we were not even able to determine, ascertain the monthly gross salary, because when we say CTC, that includes monthly gross salary. So the direct income of the individual plus indirect cost, so 12% towards PF, maximum bonus of 20% towards bonus, then contribution 3.25% towards ESI, and say 4.81% towards gratuity, maybe at the time when the person gets separated. So roughly 40% that will work out to, right? So we add this to the monthly income, we call it as CTC. That is a simple formula, right? But some of the companies, they include other things also, which may not be applicable for different other companies, some other company, right? But my point here is, please take a clear stand whether you want to have CTC as consideration in the contract of employment, or you want to have monthly gross. The choice is yours. You can do that. Number one, in case if you decide on CTC, please ensure that monthly gross income of the individual is ascertainable. Because for the purposes of doing the compliance under any of the labor laws, what is required is monthly gross salary of the individual and the deductions made on a monthly basis and the net salary. These are all the three components which are essentially required, right? If monthly gross is not ascertainable, then consequentially the deduction and the net also cannot be ascertained. So it will create difficulty in doing the compliance, proper compliance, I would say, right? So I think once the code gets implemented, it is going to be tough. So we may also have to ensure that not only maintenance of registers or submission of credit, it is done properly, right? If it is not done properly, that also qualifies for penalty, right? So this is the reason I'm saying that. Then decide on the list. So you can decide on your salary structure. You can decide on the number of components you would like to have. It can be 5, it can be 10, it can be 15. But again, the list of allowances which you are mentioning, there can be broadly two types. One is for maybe giving comfort to the individual employees. So house rent, irrespective of the type of industry, the employer can pay HRA, right? So it is more for the comfort. Say entertainment allowance, again it is common, irrespective of the industry, you can pay that. This is one part. Another part is based on the nature of employment of that company, of that industry, and also the nature of employment of that individual employee, then decide on the other allowances, right? So should I pay professional development allowance for all my employees, or should it be for a specific set of employees? You can decide on that, right? Similarly, project allowance. It is, see, every company is paying project allowance. There is no justification also when we ask for it, right? So if you want to have a component called project allowance, so in what way that is required? That should have direct link to the nature of your employment and also the individual's employment. So see, my suggestion again would, you can decide on the number of list of allowances, but you have this as a base, then decide on the allowances and then make the payment, right? Say night shift allowance. When we say night shift allowance, that should be paid only to those persons who are coming in the during the night shift. Calling it as a night shift allowance and making the payment to all the employees, I think that may not be relevant, right? And that will not be accepted also in case if inspector sees that, right? And of course, the current wage structure, as I said, if in your salary structure, if the wage portion already, if it works out to more than 50%, definitely you need not immediately go for any change. For this reason, because of the change in the definition, you need not go. But for some other reason, if you want to have a relook, then that is your choice, right? But in case if it is less than 50%, then I would suggest please go for restructuring your salary. But when you do that for any purpose, when you go for restructuring, I think you may have to get the consent of the other party also. If we have Paka union, then I think you may have to have some agreement with the union, or if there is no union but there is a representative body, then you may have to have agreement with that representative body. But even if that is not available, then it is one-on-one, right? With each employee, you may have to get their consent in one way or the other, whatever method you follow. So only then I think you can go for changing the wage structure. Then payment based on the company's policies. Again, I think this one I would definitely suggest. When you see, there are certain payments. See, you take typical example is incentive. You may not mention this in the appointment order, right? But in your company, you may have a policy to pay incentive. So this payment of incentive does not arise out of the contract of employment. And this payment of incentive does not arise out of any of the existing laws also. So it is purely based on your policy. So there are two things. One is this can be considered as additional remuneration. Now I think we know that when we discuss the definition of the term wages under the ESE Act, with respect to the additional remuneration, only if the additional remuneration is paid in an interval of not exceeding 2 months, only those payments will be considered as part of wages. If it exceeds 2 months, then that will not be treated as part of wages, right? But that will be only applicable only for additional remuneration, not for all remuneration, right? But somehow in the new code, in the definition, since it is common for PF, ESA and other legislations, the concept is nowhere it is getting mentioned, right? But since the payment emerges out of a policy, you can definitely say that it is a discretionary payment because the policy is brought in by the management on their own, right? So if it is a kind of discretionary policy, that is, it is not because of any obligation they are bringing in, right? At their discretion, if it is based on the discretion, then they can withdraw that policy also at any time. So we can also, I think, make a reference to the discretionary payments which are getting excluded on the definition of basic wages under current PF Act. The last exclusion is discretionary payments. So that is the reason gift. I think gift is excluded because it is a discretionary payment. It is not obligatory. It is not an obligatory payment, right? So similarly, if the policy itself is made at the discretion of the management, then unilaterally they can definitely revisit. Maybe after 4 years or 5 years, if they want to withdraw the policy, they can do that, right? But once you make it as obligatory, which means if it is arising out of the contract of employment, some obligation, or if it is arising out of the any of the existing laws, or if it arises out of the settlement which you enter into with the group of employees or the union, then subsequently you cannot withdraw any of the payments or any of the policies on a unilateral basis. It is not possible. So my suggestion would be, as far as possible, if I'm again saying, as far as possible, if it is possible in your company, make the payments with arising out of some policy of your own instead of making it obligatory. Once you make it obligatory, then I think you can keep on increasing it, because that will work in favor of the individual employee. He will not object to that. But if you want to reduce it, or if you want to fully withdraw it, then you cannot do it on an unilateral basis. You may have to get the consent of the individual employee. So I would suggest, if you could make commitments through the appointment order, maybe to the minimum extent possible, that could be work in your favor, maybe on a later date. So that is the reason I am saying this. Make the policies and make the payments out of the policies. This can, I'm not very sure, this is also subjective, and this is also subject to interpretation. But again, I would say, instead of making the payment obligatory through the contract of employment or through any other law or through the settlement, this will be better. At least you will have some defense tomorrow, even if somebody questions, right? Whether it is later on, whether the court will accept or not, that's a different story. But at least we will have defense. So that is the suggestion I would put.